It's strange how sometimes an otherwise ordinary event can stay in your mind because of one instant. They say that people remember where they were when they heard that Kennedy was shot or Princess Diana died. For me, a day that had started like any other and would normally be forgotten within a few days stood out because of him. It was about 11:30. I decided to get a coffee and write up some notes before returning to the office. I took my coffee to the back of the cafe and was about to pull my files from my case when I noticed him walking towards me. He was definitely coming towards me, as there was no one else sitting nearby and he was not carrying a drink. He was casually dressed, about my height, and I guessed about 25. I didn't know him, but there was a look in his eyes that was vaguely familiar. He addressed me by name, and then it began. I felt stunned, bewildered, confused. Had I heard him properly? The first word was hard to take, father. And then the accusation, abandonment. I've never abandoned anyone in my life. So I said, "What are you talking about?" He continued to stare at me. "I think you've got the wrong person," I said. He didn't think he had. Was I at Birmingham University in the 70s? Did I know a Christine? What a question, I thought. It was one of the most common names then. There were at least 3 Christines in my tutorial group. All very opinionated, if I remembered correctly. I shook my head in disbelief. He handed me an old Polaroid photograph, and I felt a sudden knot in my stomach. I held it in my hand and stared at the faded colour as if it was yesterday. 2 students with long hair, the girl in a cheesecloth skirt, the guy with a moustache. I laughed, as you do when you see the fashions of your youth. He couldn't have been sure it was me. Could have been anyone. I wondered where this was leading. Trying to stay calm, I looked him in the eye and said, "Very interesting. What's it got to do with me?" He said, "Look on the back." I turned it over, and there in faded pencil was my name and hers. And I heard her voice again saying, "I have to go away for a while."
I suppose it was a happy childhood compared with many. I loved Mum and Dad, and they seemed to love me, although sometimes when I heard them talking, it sounded as though I was a burden they could have done without. That just made me try harder to please them. You see, I never knew my real mother. I was brought up by my grandparents, but I called them Mum and Dad. I didn't care that they seemed older than my friends' parents. It was years before I learned the truth. I think I was 9 or 10. I'd learned the basics of the facts of life, and one day I asked, in my childlike way, if it had been a shock when I had come into their lives. Dad muttered something like, "You could say that." And then Mum said, "I think you're old enough to know the truth." And with a great deal of effort, told me about my mother being in a car accident. The doctors saved me, her unborn baby, but they could not save her. She held me very tightly, probably thinking that I was going to collapse at this shocking news. But the fact is, I took it in my stride. I was too young to be curious about someone I'd never met, even if she was my birth mother. I accepted it as a matter of course, what my parents told me. I felt a bit like a character in a Roald Dahl story, except I was being looked after by people who loved me. It wasn't until much later the questions came into my head about who I was. I worked hard at school and showed an aptitude for languages. My mum encouraged me, although there was always seemed a wistfulness when she did so. Like so many things with parents, I accepted it as a way and let it pass. There were tears, my graduation, and even Dad seemed to have a little tremble in his bottom lip and look as if remembering something in the past. My ambition was to work abroad, and after university, I went to work in Brussels. Life was good. Then one day, Mum called and said that Dad had collapsed at work and been taken into hospital with a suspected heart attack. He was comfortable, but there was no guarantee to his recovery. Mum told me not to worry, and she'd keep me posted, but I said that I would come straight home. She put up a pretense of arguing, but there was no way that I wasn't seeing my dad again. At work, I arranged time off. It was midweek, and there was a seat available on the Eurostar. I stared out of the window, but whether it's the French countryside or the fields of Kent, they made no impression on me as I thought about Dad and all he had done for me. Games of cricket in the back garden, playing cards on a Sunday afternoon, even teaching me to drive, although they were not always the comfortable times. I smiled to myself, remembering how he had surprised me with a course of lessons with a proper instructor, which probably saved the sanity of both of us. I didn't care how old he was. I just knew that I was not ready to lose him. Arriving at St. Pancras, I left the station as quickly as I could and found a taxi. I would have reached Liverpool Street more quickly if I'd taken the tube, but I was not in the mood to be pressed up against other people. I bought a single ticket to Dis and made my way to platform 9, where the Norwich train was waiting. Once we were moving, I called Mum and arranged for her to meet me at the station. She burst into tears when she greeted me, and I hugged her tightly. Composing ourselves, we headed for the hospital. We then visited Dad. He smiled when he saw me and held out his hand. I returned his smile with a difficulty because I had never seen him look so ill. I held his hand for a long time as I tried to reassure him that all would be well. The doctors were hopeful of a good recovery, but it wasn't to be. 6 months later, shortly after my 23rd birthday, he suffered a second attack, and this one was fatal. Once again, I returned from Brussels. Mum was in pieces. I knew that they had been childhood sweethearts, and she needed me to help with all the arrangements. I reassured her that Dad had left her well provided. The mortgage was paid off, and there was a nice little nest egg, but that meant nothing to her without Dad. I had to return to Brussels, but made arrangements to have more time off over Christmas and New Year. I knew that Mum would need all the support I could give her at this time. For some people, the biggest worry was the so-called millennium bug. But for Mum, it was the future and the empty years ahead without Dad.
She was our little girl. I was only 18 when she was born. We had married quickly 5 months earlier. Oh, shock horror, the 50s. No one would say anything these days. Anyway, I was in love with her father. We had known each other for what seemed ages. A few years later, Neil Sedaka sang Happy Birthday Sweet 16, and we both agreed he could have been singing about us. Anyway, we started courting. No one uses that word nowadays. And on my 18th birthday, we went dancing at the Palais. What an evening. Rock and roll had just hit the UK and we loved it. I was probably intoxicated as much by the music as the baby sham. And as I'm sure you have guessed, one thing led to another. And before long, we were standing in front of my parents saying that we wanted to get married as soon as possible. We had found a flat, and as we both had jobs and had known each other for so long, we wanted everything to be legal. Of course, they realised the truth pretty quickly. But when Christine was born, they loved her just as much as we did. No doubt there were those who said that it wouldn't last, but it did. And we were so happy for 20 years. Christine was a typical little girl, pushing her dolly in the toy pram, marrying Dolly to her teddy, drawing countless pictures of princesses and horses. We took her to see Snow White, and for weeks afterwards she would sing, "Someday my prince will come," and made little plasticine dwarfs. She made friends easily. Her best friend was a pretty little girl with dark curly hair, Susie. I can see her now with Christine, heads together, laughing at some schoolgirl joke or chasing Christine around the garden. They were inseparable. Christine did well at school. She developed a talent for mimicry that sometimes got her into trouble, but was never malicious. I know I'm her mother, but she was clever. She really was. She did well in all her subjects, but when she stood out from her classmates was in languages. Her teacher told us that she had a great ability with both French and German, and she should certainly consider taking them at A-level and maybe at university, which of course is what she did. Why she went to Birmingham, I've no idea. Maybe because Susie was going there. Would have events been different if she'd gone elsewhere? Well, she wouldn't have met him, would she? But I suppose there would have been another boy in another place, who knows? Suffice to say, in February of her 3rd year, she came home unexpectedly. She said she didn't feel well and wanted some peace and quiet that she couldn't get in her student house. I thought it was odd, but didn't say anything. Her father was away on business, and the next morning I heard her in the bathroom being sick. She didn't come down for breakfast, and after a little while I went up to her bedroom and slowly opened the door. Underneath the Mark Bolan and David Bowie posters, my little girl was curled up, sobbing softly to herself. It broke my heart to see her. I knew that history was repeating itself. I sat on the edge of the bed, stroked her head and said, "How long?" "About 8 weeks, she said, and clung to me as she had as a little girl. She asked me if I was mad at her. How could I be? Disappointed, yes, but mad at my little girl, never. "Who's the father?" I asked. "Just a boy," she said. "Oh, there was a party. Oh, sorry, I can't be sure." Did I believe her? I really don't know, but despite more questions from both me and her father, we never knew his name. I always believed that she knew who it was, and that, unlike her own father, he was refusing to do the right by her, and for some unknown reason, she was protecting him. She never returned to university. Her tutor telephoned to inquire after her, and she explained that she was ill and unable to complete the year, but if they would have her back, she would like to return in the autumn. Of course, this never happened. The pregnancy was going fine as far as we could tell, and despite the circumstances, we were looking forward to greeting our grandchild in August. Then the accident happened. She was driving her Mini back from town. It was a country road that she had driven down 100 times before. She knew that there were fields and gates. The tractor driver should have taken more care as well. I'm sorry, I don't like to think of what happened. I listened at the inquest, but it was all a blur. All I know for sure is that there was a collision and our beautiful, talented daughter did not survive. By a miracle, the doctors were able to safely deliver her son, and we called him Christopher. What else could we do but bring him up as our own? We became his mum and dad. When we eventually told him about his mother, I thought he would be devastated, but he listened and then said, "Oh, I see, but you're my mum and dad now, aren't you?" And I cried.
That first Christmas was a somewhat bittersweet affair. Dad was never far from our thoughts. There was a lot of reminiscing of past Christmases. Mum reminded me of when I had a plan to catch Santa in the act of leaving the presents. Of course, Dad was aware and had to be very nimble to avoid all the string and tin cans I had stretched across the doorway and windows. As always, there was plenty of food. Mum seemed to expect me to be eating Dad's share, but she wasn't eating much herself. As we approached the new year, there was a lot of discussion on the radio and television as to what the new century would bring and how it would differ from the past 100 years. The pedant in me said that the century had one more year to go, but it got me thinking. Mum had mentioned my mother only rarely over the years, mainly in connection with both of us being good at languages. Now, with Dad gone, I began to think more about who I was. I began to ask questions about my mother and what was she like. When Mum talked about her, the years fell away, but she became wistful whenever Dad entered a particular story.
When Trevor died, I was absolutely devastated. Christopher was a tower of strength to me. I had lost the only man I had ever loved, and I needed his help to deal with all the formalities and practicalities. We tried to make the funeral a celebration of his dad's life. He managed to say a few words and even made us laugh with a couple of stories. We hired a room at the local pub for the obligatory buffet. I was surprised to see Susie there. She said that her mother had told her when she saw the notice in the newspaper and thought she owed it to Christine. That was nice of her. I hadn't seen her since Christine's funeral, when she had been nearly as emotional as me and Dad, especially when she saw baby Christopher. I had tried then to get information about the father from her, but she pleaded ignorance. This time she only stayed for a few minutes. It was a great relief when we said goodbye to the last guest. We went home quietly and spent the next couple of days with our thoughts and reminiscing. Christopher had to return to Brussels, but as good as his word, he was back for Christmas. I tried my best, but it was so hard. I put on a tape that Trevor had made of the local church bells. Oh, this cheered me up somewhat until suddenly his voice came out of the stereo saying, "Merry Christmas, love," while the bells rang. After Christmas, I couldn't get excited about the new millennium that everyone seemed to be talking about. Christopher seemed more introspective. I walked into the lounge and saw him holding Christine's photograph. He'd hardly ever mentioned her, but now he wanted to know something about her. What she was like as a little girl. What her hobbies were, who were her friends. Was she really a good linguist? I answered him as best as I could, except for the one thing he really wanted to know. Who was his father? All I could say was that he clearly didn't care for him or Christine. He had made no inquiry as to why she was not at university. He must have known she was pregnant and rejected her, and that would have been the reason she came home like she did. He asked me if I was curious about his father. I just replied that as far as I was concerned, Christine wouldn't say who he was, and she had been abandoned to her fate. That might sound very old-fashioned and melodramatic, but that was how I felt when he was born, and how I still felt.
I was thinking more about who I was. Who was my father? Does he even know who I am? A dark cloud descended over us when I asked Mum. She looked grim. She didn't know who he was. She became quite agitated and angry, saying that he clearly hadn't cared about my mother, or he wouldn't have abandoned her. She used that word so much that it started to obsess me. I had been abandoned. So much worse than being orphaned.
I changed the subject and told him that I was thinking setting up the new year. I'd never forget his dad, but there were too many memories and a new house could help me make a fresh start. To be honest, I don't know what I wanted, and in the end I didn't move. I said I wanted to send Trevor's clothes to the charity shop and asked Christopher to get a suitcase out of the loft. What he brought down gave me quite a turn.
Climbing into the loft, I switched on the light and looked around at all the memories that had been piled up over the years. Old board games, my train set, even an old television set. I saw blue suitcases nearby and lifted the first one. Empty, as I expected. Underneath was an older suitcase. That might be better for the charity shop, I thought. I lifted it. It wasn't empty. Opening it, I saw clothes, books, and some letters. On the envelope, I read Christine Williams and an address in Birmingham.
He'd found Christine's suitcase. He asked me if it was okay for him to look through the case. It was his mother's, so of course he had every right to do so. I didn't expect him to embark on a quest to trace his father. What good would that do? He asked me if I had read her diaries. No, I just said that they were private and it didn't seem right to intrude when she died. Trevor had put the case away and we forgot about it. I didn't add that I had looked at her diaries briefly for what I believed were the relative times, but was none the wiser as to his father. Over the next few days, I would pass Christopher's room and see him sitting on his bed, reading her diaries or gazing at a photograph, deep in thought.
We were best friends from such a young age that I can't remember how old we were. I think we first met at a play school next to the church, and then later at primary school. It was natural for us to play together. We would have sat together if we could, but we were seated alphabetically and were at opposite sides of the classroom. That was probably for the best. As soon as it was break time, we would find one another and talk and talk. Actually, as we got older, I believe that Christine talked more, and as time went by, I was happy just to listen to her lovely voice. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In primary school, if it was someone's birthday, the whole class would sing happy birthday. In our first term at school, we learned that we shared a birthday. We thought that was wonderful. We called ourselves the twins. It didn't matter to us that we weren't sisters or looked alike. From that point of view, we were as different as could be. I had dark curly hair and brown eyes, while she had straight blonde hair and blue eyes. She was also a little taller than me, not much, but it did annoy me sometimes. When we were 11, we both got through to grammar school. We made other friends, but there was no one more special to me than Christine. Any harsh words between us were absolutely devastating. I learned from my mother that she had been told by Christine's mum that at times like this, Christine would cry when she got home. That made me feel better and sad at the same time. But it did mean that usually within a couple of days, we were talking and giggling as if nothing had happened. As we grew older, we each found different things that we were good at. I was more into sport, playing and watching. I was thrilled when I was picked for the school hockey team. Christine would laugh at me coming off the pitch, hot, sweaty and dirty from the muddy, bumpy field. None of these modern artificial pitches for us. Christine reluctantly took part in games lessons and stayed remarkably clean. The games mistress was probably the only teacher who didn't fall for her charms and good humour. Christine didn't seem to care and was not visibly upset when sent off for tripping another girl with her stick. At least, not until she was told that she couldn't go back to the changing room, but instead should run around the edge of the hockey field for the rest of the lesson. If the teacher had heard her language afterwards, then she would have been in even bigger trouble. She wasn't goody two-shoes, but she was generally well liked. Her passion at school was music, especially singing. She was in the school choir and often took the solos. She bought a guitar and would accompany herself to all genres of music. She had a beautiful voice, and sometimes I would just be lost in gazing at her while she played and sang. Friends would sometimes have requests, and she always tried to do her best for them. Although when she tried Whole Lot of Love on an acoustic guitar, we all ended up rolling on the floor laughing. Oh. As you would expect from a grammar school, we were encouraged to go to university. Neither of us were particularly interested in the sciences. I gravitated to the arts and made history my aim, whilst Christine showed a remarkable gift for languages. I remember she had a French exchange student stay with her. Nicole? Anyway, Christine brought her to meet me and a couple of other girls. Nicole was supposed to be improving her English, but as she was struggling so much, Christine conversed in French to a much higher standard than any of the rest of us could have managed. Later on, when I expressed my amazement, she said that she hoped to pursue a career that would take her around the world and use her linguistic skills. That was a jolt to my stomach. We were 14 years old, and that was the first realization I had that one day we would go our separate ways. She saw the look on my face and asked me what was wrong. When I told her, she laughed, that musical laugh of hers. I was hurt. How could she be so heartless? When she saw that I wasn't laughing, she stopped. Smiling tenderly, she said, "We will always be friends, no matter where we are. We can go travelling together, and who knows, your job may take you abroad as well. Don't worry." She kissed me on the forehead and gave me a hug. It felt so good, and I clung to her for dear life.
1973. This is my diary. I'm going to uni, and I think it'd be a good idea to record my time there. Maybe in a few years I'll look back at it and laugh at my naivety, but here goes. I'm off to Birmingham tomorrow. Wow, the big city. This is exciting, starting a whole new chapter of my life. I'm nervous about meeting new people. Will they like me? At least I'm not alone. I'm glad Susie's here with me. I thought she was going to go to East Anglia. It's great that she decided to leave sleepy Norfolk as well. The halls of residence is modern, and Susie's just down the corridor. Got told off by a proper brummie for calling it the Black Country. You wouldn't know it from some of the buildings. Went to Moseley Rugby Club. What a laugh. The guys tried to get us to play a drinking game. Well, Susie was all for it and was cheered on. I stayed sober and had to help her home. A couple of guys tried their luck, but in my best Norfolk, I told them to F off. I don't think they'd heard a girl swear before, because one, who was quite posh, not bad looking actually, just stood there with his mouth open and closing like a fish and then burst out laughing. He said, "You'll do well here." And I think I will. Really enjoying uni. The work is hard, but it's going well. Susie's enjoying her history, so it looks as though we made the right choice. I don't see much of each other during the day, but we go to the Union Bar together. She's gone home this weekend. I miss her. Summer term already. I went out with Wyn, a Welsh rugby fanatic. I told him I'd been to Moseley, but didn't really understand the game. He said not surprising if that was my only experience, and then he rabbited on for ages about Welsh rugby and someone Bennett and JPR. I shut him up by kissing him, which he took as a good sign, but I warned him not to get too excited. Yeah. I wonder what Susie would have done. I told Susie about Wyn. He's on her cause, and she says he's okay, but hasn't forgiven Edward I. This meant nothing to me, and she explained that he was the king who subjugated the Welsh. I said I didn't think Wynne seemed at all subjugated. She said, just be careful, he has a bit of a reputation. Great night with Wynne. Wynne cancelled, said his sister and parents had come up unexpectedly. I'll see him on Monday. Wynne's a two-timing bastard. I'm done with boys.
Going to Birmingham was a big change for both of us. So much bigger and noisier than Ipswich or even Norwich. Christine thought they'd use black bricks for the buildings in the city. I laughed and pointed out that it was most likely pollution from all the industry and traffic. We met new people on our different courses, but still stayed close friends. Alcohol seemed to play a big part in the student life for some. I learned my lesson early on when Christine had to help me home. Boys, they were the problem. Some tried their luck with me, but I wasn't having any of it. Christine, with her long blonde hair and sparkling eyes, was a magnet to some. I warned her to be careful, especially with one Welsh guy. He really was the pits. I'm glad I was there for her when she found out that she'd been used. She bumped into him with his fiancée. I held her tightly as she cried on my shoulder and told her that all men are bastards. In the summer, we went to the Nebworth Music Festival. It was the first time it had been held and was an amazing experience. My abiding memory is of Van Morrison, not just because he played for ages, but because Christine kept singing his songs all the way home. She giggled when she sang, "You're my brown-eyed girl." Oh, that was a good evening.
September 1974. Back to uni. Sharing a house with Susie and two others, Caroline and Linda. They're also on the history course. Linda going out with Wynne. I tried to warn her, doesn't believe he's engaged. Linda brought Wynne back for a coffee. His face when he saw me. Collapse of stout party. Another round of all men are bastards. 21st of November. I can't believe it. Bombs in Birmingham. The Mulberry Bush and the tavern in the town. We were in the Mulberry 2 days ago. They haven't said how many dead yet. It's horrible. I'm crying whilst writing. Going home for Christmas. The atmosphere around uni has been a bit down since the bombs. Slade and Wizard being sung very raucously in the Union Bar, shouting, "It's Christmas!" like Noddy. I wonder what'll be number one. Predictions are for mud, but that's too sad for me. We need something jolly at Christmas after what's happened. 1975. Harold Wilson has promised a referendum on the common market. If we stay a member, there are going to be some great opportunities in Europe for me as a multilinguist. I've always wanted to travel. Even Birmingham expanded my horizons from sleepy Norfolk. I know Susie wants to do research abroad as well. It'd be good to go together. Rag Week. Magazine full of rude and sexist jokes, but I have to admit, some are very funny. Not sure that I'll leave it lying around at home though. Interdepartmental games evening tomorrow at the SU. We're going as a team from our house. I'm going to be a nominal historian for a night. I know about 1066, but I hope I'm not caught out with anything else. That was fun. Some stupid games, many including alcohol. Trying to play charades and not speak when you've had a few is hard. We played against 4 guys from the law department. 2 were very posh, very public school. Talked about skiing in St. Moritz as it was the most normal thing. The other 2 were normal. They were very cheeky. One did a sounds like chitty chitty bang bang and pointed at my chest. I laughed, but I may have blushed, because afterwards he leant over, smelling of beer, and said he hoped I wasn't offended and kissed me on the cheek. I said that's okay. He kissed me again, properly. We broke away as comments were made. I looked up and Susie was looking daggers at me. We argued on the way home. It was just a bit of fun. I didn't think she was prudish. All the snogging that goes on around her, she's never said a word. I don't like seeing her upset. Caroline and Linda teased me about that law guy. We didn't even know his name, so they called him the Kisser. Susie didn't join in. Saw the Kisser today. We were in the park and he was playing football with his mates and the ball landed nearby. He came to fetch it and I thought he hadn't seen me. But as he picked up the ball, he turned and said, "The plough, 8 o'clock," and returned to his game. Susie said he's arrogant. I said, yes, he is. But I smiled inside. Susie said she didn't want to play gooseberry and wouldn't come with me, which hurt. I went with Caroline. Her boyfriend was playing darts there. As we left, Susie called out, "Have a good time." Well, it sounded sarcastic, but I'm sure it wasn't. That's not like Susie. We arrived just after 8. The darts were finishing. He saw me and came straight over. Caroline went somewhere with her boyfriend. He bought me a drink and didn't object when I asked to sit outside, but I hate my clothes reeking of tobacco smoke. I told him that he was now known as the Kisser in our house. He laughed and said, "My mates just call me Kay. So Kay it'll be."
I was halfway through her second year reading the diary and thinking things weren't any clearer. I was sincerely hoping that Wynne was not my father, as he sounded a complete jerk. On the other hand, he clearly had a reputation of not being faithful, and lepers don't change their spots. I hoped she hadn't fallen for his lies again. And who was the Kisser? The mysterious Kay? He seemed more of a mate than a boyfriend. There were always other people around when he was mentioned. But she wasn't able to help very much. I got the feeling she didn't really approve of my quest. She did say that my mum and Susie had been friends since primary school and were always very close. I asked if she had contact details for Susie, but she said no. I wonder if Susie knows more about what went on. I'll have to try and track her down somehow.
September 1975. I passed my driving test. Now to get a car. There's a little yellow Mini at the garage down the road. 5 years old. Mum and Dad aren't sure, but it'd be great to be a bit more independent. Bought the car. Dad doesn't like Minis, but he said it drove well. Named my car Mouse. Drove over to Susie's and showed off Mouse. I'd kept the driving test secret in case I failed. Her face when she saw me was great. She told me off for keeping it a secret, laughing as she did so. Autumn 1975. Drove back to uni with Susie. We've got the same house with Caroline and Linda. Lots to do this year with finals in a few months. Kay likes Mouse. Went for a drive and he played Aladdin Sane on his tape player. He loves Bowie. Interesting chat. I told him to be true to himself. Susie's got a Polaroid camera. fascinating to see the picture within a few seconds of it being taken. I drove to Stratford, had a great time spouting odd Shakespearean phrases at each other. Dave made us laugh with his Richard III impression. I said, out, damn Spock, in case he started barking like an idiot. I laughed. Susie sighed. She did, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? And then added, who cares, you narcissistic pillock? Dave thought that was a bit harsh and added that wherefore actually meant, why are you called Romeo Montague and not where are you? Susie called him pedantic. He thought it was nice that Romeo fell for Juliet straight away, and wouldn't Susie like it if someone felt that way about her? He looked crushed when Susie just ignored him. I can't make her out sometimes. Kay asked me if Susie was okay. Dave really likes her, but he was put off by her attitude in Stratford. I said I'd speak to her. I must be really slow. I've known her all my life and never really considered her in that way. When I mentioned Dave, she said she wasn't interested. I said, why not? He's good looking and funny. She looked at me almost with pity and said, it's not just Dave. I must have looked blank. But then the penny dropped.
She really had no idea. She couldn't understand why I wasn't just interested in Dave. I tried to make it clear that it wasn't just Dave, who was everything that Christine said he was, but any guy. When have you ever known me take an interest in any boy in that way? All she could say was, oh, I hadn't realised. I mean, well, you don't look like a... And what does a lesbian look like? I said. She couldn't say anything. I'm still the same person. Oh, please don't look at me like that. Silence. Then she smiled and laughed her beautiful silvery laugh. Well, clearly, in some cases, they look like a gorgeous brown-eyed girl. I breathed a sigh of relief. I thought she must have realised by now I never said anything because I didn't want to spoil our friendship. Nothing could do that, she said. Have you got anyone special? There is someone, but I'm not sure if she feels the same. You know her. But I won't say any more today. Christine looked at me and said, well, I hope she realises soon for both your sakes. Come here. And gave me the longest hug. I so wanted to kiss her, but hoped, as I had for so many years, that she would realise that she was more than my best friend. I loved her and wanted her. I hated feeling jealous of boys. I understood why they fancied her, but they didn't know her as I knew her. They could never love her as I loved her.
So much that I hadn't really thought about has suddenly become much clearer. I told Susie that I'll always be her friend, and yes, I do love her, but not in that way. At least, I don't think so. End of term party last night. I told Kay about Susie. Told me not to worry about her or me. Someone had bought homemade beer. That was strong, and a few of us were very merry. I think I was a bit careless. I hope everything will be okay. Didn't tell Susie though. She seemed to have found a friend last night as well. Good for her. We're driving back tomorrow for Christmas. Susie managed to get a Christmas post job. I'm going to be doing turkeys. 1976. I'm late. This isn't good. I was sick this morning and Susie caught me. I broke down and told her. She said she'd guessed. Cried into her shoulder. She held me close and asked me how and why. I tried to joke and said I thought she knew basic biology. I cursed the homebrew and being careless. She asked me what I was going to do, which I thought was a stupid question, but she was serious. I said, it's inside me now, and I will love it. I should tell him, but I know what he'll say. It wouldn't be right for either of us, but particularly not for him.
The father? I asked. What about him? She said. What has he said? He doesn't know. Well, you'd better tell him. Why? Why? Because he needs to do the right thing by you. That's exactly why I haven't told him. I don't want a baby to trap us into a relationship that we'll both regret. This went on for ages, but she was adamant. Then she said that she would go home so no one at uni would know.
So it was at a party, just as she had told her mother. But I'm still no the wiser. As to my father's identity, I'm sure that Susie must know. They seem so close. I can't believe she doesn't know the answer, even if she didn't tell Mum. I mean, my grandmother. I found out her surname was Carter, but she no longer lived in the area. It wasn't the rarest of names, and even with the internet, I kept hitting dead ends. Then I got lucky. I had gone back to help my grandmother to sort out through some of Dad's things. I was watching a historical reconstruction program on television about the rebuilding of London after the Great Fire. I missed the start, so didn't know who was presenting, but she seemed vaguely familiar. My grandmother came into the room and exclaimed, "That's her! That's Susie!" I clicked the info button on the remote, and there it was, presented by Susanna Carter. That was why she was familiar. She'd been at Dad's funeral, but I hadn't spoken with her.
The letter arrived under cover of another from an agent. What to do? I'd seen him at Mr. Williams' funeral supporting his grandmother. After all these years, I couldn't take my eyes off him. He was Christine's son. After the service, I went to the pub with others, not just to show my respects, but also to get another glimpse of Christopher. I didn't stay long. It was too painful. I looked at him and saw Christine's piercing blue eyes and her smile. He was the son I never had. Christine had returned home in February 76, and I didn't see her again until the Easter break. She was feeling better by then and was starting to show. She insisted on driving everywhere, and we enjoyed our time together. The only time that she got annoyed was when I broached the subject of the father. Her mother had questioned me, and I had to deny all knowledge. I had my suspicions, but Christine stayed stumm. I would say to her, you don't have to be ashamed of who it is, but he really should be told. She laughed and said, oh, stop it. I persisted. Is it Kay? Is it Dave? Oh my God, you didn't fall for that bastard win again, did you? No, I did not. She almost shouted at me. Now, for the last time, stop asking me. Otherwise, we will fall out. And you know I can't stand that at any time, and particularly not now. I need you. She needed me. Those 3 words stayed with me as we drove home. She followed me into my house and up to my bedroom. We sat on the bed beneath my posters of Janice Ian and Helen Reddy. I've been thinking, I said, about you needing me. You know I love you and would do anything for you. Bringing up a baby is hard work, so they tell me. If you don't want the father to be tied down, why don't we do it together? You know that you can count on me, and I will love your baby as if it's my own. What do you say? There was not a lot she could say. I'd taken her by surprise. She looked me in the eyes, hugged me, and just said, oh, Susie, is that a yes? Maybe, she replied. It could have worked, you know. We hadn't sorted the practicalities well. To be honest, we hadn't really discussed it further, but the way she was involving me, I was confident that we would be together. If it hadn't been for that bloody tractor and Christine's beloved mouth crumbling like a crisp packet. His letters stayed unanswered for a couple of days. I had so many mixed emotions. Then I picked up my phone and invited him to my house.
Susie had clearly done well for herself. With a townhouse in Bayswater opposite a private park, I have to admit to some trepidation before our meeting, and was about to steady my nerves with a quick drink, but decided that breathing alcohol fumes over a lady whose help I was seeking was not the best idea I've ever had. I climbed the steps to her house and rang the doorbell. She opened the door and stood there just looking at me for a few seconds. Then with a quick, come in, she ushered me into a room. It was simply but smartly furnished, with a mixture of modern and traditional furniture. In a corner was an old bureau open with a laptop on it. Above, in a silver frame, was a photograph of 2 laughing girls in their 70s clothes, Susie and my mother.
You're in that photo. She didn't want the bump to show, so she stood behind Mouse. That's what she called her car, her Mini.
Yes, I know. How long before, you know, the
Accident? About 2 weeks. The heat wave had been going for about 3 weeks and didn't end until September. She was starting to feel the heat by then, but she still kept her smile. Oh, sit down, sit down. How much do you know about Christine?
my mother, or rather my grandmother, has told me about her life at home and the accident, of course. But it's only since Dad died that I really thought about who I was.
I see. I wondered why it was only now that you were trying to find your father.
And I've read her diaries from when she went to university. That's how I learned about your friendship with her. I know you were very close. There's no indication that she ever told you who my father was, but I hoped that you might be able to give me some pointers.
Diaries. How detailed are they?
Enough for me to know how you felt about her. The people who seem to get the most mentions are you, Linda, and Caroline and Dave. Wynne and someone who she calls Kay. When she first mentions him, she says you all called him the kisser.
Yes. A silly little joke that stuck. Well, you can cross Wynne off your list of suspects. I did ask about him, and she gave a most emphatic no, thank God. He was a right bastard to every girl he met.
Yes, I got that impression. What about Dave or Kay? She really mentions one without the other.
Yeah, they were a bit of a double act. Do you know how she met Kay?
Yes.
We only referred to him as the kisser because we didn't know his name. Turned out it was Keith, hence calling him Kay. I couldn't be sure that either of them was a proper boyfriend, let alone if she had slept with either of them. She was quite private about her relationships. Any talk of friends was always non-sexual. That doesn't mean she didn't have fun with boys.
I've brought some photos in the hope that you can identify them.
Yes, that's Dave and that's Keith. I can't remember their surnames, if ever I knew them.
Oh, looks like I've hit a brick wall then. Sorry to have bothered you.
Wait, I've got an idea. Pass me that box. This has got old uni stuff here. This is our graduation programme. Let's see if we can find them in there.
We knew that Dave and Keith were law students. In that section, we found 4 Davids and 2 Keiths. The Davids all had common names, 2 Jones, Robinson and Brown. They would take some tracking down. The Keiths were a little better, and Morrison and Thompson. It would take ages to try and track down the Davids. The Keiths would be a bit easier, and my money would be on Morrison.
Why not Thompson?
In her diary, she said that she called him Kay because that was what his mates called him, as well as it being K for kisser. I think if his name was Thompson, his mates may have called him something else, because mates can be cruel.
Such as?
His initials are KT or Katie. If a mate said that, it would stick, believe me.
Really?
Really?
Boys really are pathetic.
I read that you used to take Polaroid photographs. Have you kept any?
If I have, they'll be in this box. Looking through the box, I came across a red plastic photograph holder with clear plastic pockets for the photos. There were pictures of Stratford, swans on the Avon, Dave doing his Richard III impression. And then we saw it. Christine with her long hair and a guy with long hair and moustache, arms around each other. That's him. That's Kay. I usually mark the details on the back.
What if it's someone we've never heard of?
That's always a possibility, but I doubt it. Christine wasn't that sort of girl, but if alcohol was involved, who knows what she might do.
In her diary, she said she had been careless rather than had made a mistake, which she might have put if it had been a one-off.
Maybe. To be honest, I never inquired too closely about her friendship with Keith. You know how I felt, and I didn't want to learn anything that would make it more painful for me.
From all I've read and from what you've told me, I'm sure it's Keith. But then again, who knows? It's bloody like Mamma Mia.
If you find him, show him that photo. You should know from his reaction if it's him. But if it is, what do you expect from him? As far as I know, he didn't know about the pregnancy, and she died after final, so he may not even have heard about the accident. All he knew was that she had gone home. I don't know if he tried to contact her.
Back home, I held the Polaroid in my hand and stared at the writing on the back. October 75. Christine Williams, Keith Morrison. At long last, I had something positive to go on. The elusive and mysterious K had now been identified. It always seemed the logical choice. There was nothing definite in the diaries to say that he and my mother were lovers. Mum, sorry, my grandmother knew nothing about him other than an occasional mention by my mother along with other friends from university. She certainly didn't recall anyone inquiring after my mother following her return home. How to track down Keith Morrison and confront him? A Google search showed millions of results. There was no Facebook back in that time, and he hadn't signed up for Friends Reunited. Okay, I knew that he had studied law. He did become a barrister or solicitor. I tried the professional websites, and on the Law Society website, I found a match. Same name and qualifying in 1979. Did the firm have a website? They did, and included pictures of their solicitors. I looked at the Polaroid photo that Susie had given me. Had the long-haired, moustached guy in the photo become the spectacled, bald man in suit and tie that I was now looking at? I stared and stared, trying to get my head around the change. Think logically, Chris, I said to myself. What was I expecting to see? The 21st century lawyer stuck in the 70s? I telephoned the firm and asked to speak with a Mr. Morrison. The receptionist said that he wouldn't be in court. He would be in court all day, and could she take a message? I said it wasn't urgent. I would call back in the morning. I was told that he was in the magistrate's court most mornings, so would be better to try in the afternoon. That was interesting. I decided to go to the court the following day. I didn't sleep well that night. I tried to rehearse how I would confront him. What would I say? When I slept, I was arguing with him, and as is the way with dreams, the scenario kept changing. First, he would admit he was my father, then deny it. My mother appeared and told us not to argue. Then he said he was glad I'd found him. Of course, when I woke, I couldn't remember any of the brilliant things that I had said to him. I had never been in a court before and didn't know what to expect. I joined a varied queue of people waiting to go through a security arch after emptying pockets. When it was my turn, I set off the alarm. The security guard waved his wand around me. "What have you got in your pocket?" he asked. I nervously patted myself. It was my Nokia. Nerves were clearly getting to me. "Sorry," I mumbled. I was directed upstairs to the courts. As I wondered how I would find him, I heard a voice behind me say, "Mr. Morrison, your client has arrived." And I heard a reply, "Good. I'll go down to the cells and hopefully we can get him on quickly." I turned to see who was speaking, and for the first time saw the man I believed to be my father. At least he hadn't changed from the picture on the website. He said something to the gaunt young man next to him and walked quickly away. Sitting in court, I listened to Morris calmly, and it seemed to me authoritatively talk about his clients and their worlds which seemed completely alien to me. Only one of his clients was sent to prison, and he left the dock with a pitiful cry of, "It's my birthday!" Morrison left the court. I followed him out into the street. I was still very nervous. In spite of all my efforts to trace him, I was still unsure as to how to approach him. I followed him into the high street and saw him enter a coffee shop. Wait for him to come out with his drink and approach him while he is more relaxed, I thought to myself. Then I saw through the window that he was drinking in the cafe. Okay, this is it, I said to myself, and steeling myself went inside. My eyes adjusted to the dark interior, and I saw him sitting at the back searching in his briefcase. I said his name, and he looked up as I approached. Then I just blurted out, "You're my father, and you abandoned my mother." He looked shocked, flustered, a denial. And then I produced the photograph.
This could take some time. Let's take a drink into the park, and I'll tell you as much as I can. Look, whatever it is you think I've done or not done, this is going to take some time. You've got questions, and so have I. Let's go somewhere where we can talk without embarrassing ourselves in front of others.
You mean you don't want to be embarrassed?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Not me, but how you're reacting. What do you want to drink?
Nothing.
Suit yourself, but I'm getting another to take out.
Okay, I'll have a black coffee.
I ordered, and we stood awkwardly together as the barista made our drinks. He followed me through the high street, and we turned into the park. There was a bench overlooking the river. We sat down, and we were silent. He seemed to know that I would start our conversation. I contemplated how to begin, and then started with the obvious. You seem to know who I am. What's your name?
Christopher Williams.
And Christine Williams was your mother?
Was my mother.
Was?
She was in a car accident. The doctors delivered me, but couldn't save her.
I'm sorry. I had no idea.
It wasn't until my dad, or rather, my grandfather died last year that I started to wonder about who my real father was. My mother never told anyone who my father was, but from what I've discovered, I believe it's you.
On the basis of one photo?
No, not just the photo. I've been reading her diaries.
And what did they say?
Enough to make you my prime suspect.
Really? Interesting. I won't tell you any lies, but let me ask you a question. Did Christine, your mother, ever say in her diaries that we'd slept together or been anything other than good friends?
Well, no, but the way you met, being known as the kisser, and your subsequent friendship, well, it just seemed the logical conclusion. There was no one else mentioned in her diaries apart from your mate Dave, and he fancied Susie, not Mum.
Oh, yes, Susie. Have you spoken to her? I've seen her on TV. She's done well for herself. I told Dave he was wasting his time. Christine told me why. I always thought Susie was a bit jealous of me spending time with Christine. We were rarely allowed to be on our own. That didn't really matter because we were great friends who made each other laugh. It would have surprised me if there was anything intimate in her diary. I would never have thought of her as the kiss and tell sort. And I suspect that extended to writing her own private thoughts.
But did you, you know?
What, sleep with her? Think. What does that prove? If I say yes or no, then you'll know further forward. So what do? Ask me for a DNA test?
Stop playing games. You're not in court now. Are you married? What will your wife say?
Oh, please. Now you're playing games. I'll tell you as much as I can. I'm not sure how much it will help. Yes, Christine and I slept together, made love, had sex, whatever you want to call it. And yes, I loved her. I think she loved me. But not with a view to spending our lives together, just as really very, very good friends. Contrary to what you might have thought, it wasn't all sex, drugs, and rock and roll in the 70s. Not that everyone was celibate. It was always thus. There were some guys for whom sex was everything in a relationship, but not for me with Christine. Yes, there were times when the hugging turned into, well, I don't have to spell it out, but only on a few occasions. The last time was after a party just before Christmas. Yes, I don't think we used protection. After the Christmas break, we hung around together as usual. Then one evening, one normal evening, she kissed me on the cheek and said, "Don't worry, but I have to go away for a while." As she turned to go, I asked why. She blew me a kiss, put her finger to her lips, and that was the last time I saw her. I had no idea she was pregnant. Susie wouldn't tell me anything. I did ask her tutor, who just said he was aware that there were some family matters that meant she was deferring her final year. I believed she'd contact me if she wanted to. When she didn't, I suppose I was knocked and got on with my finals, law society exams, then stopped being a student and tried to become an adult.
You must be my father. You've both mentioned the party before Christmas. And that's when she says she thinks that she was careless. That would be the lack of protection you mentioned. It must be you.
At the risk of sounding like a lawyer, there's a strong circumstantial case. I don't think Christine was sleeping around, but maybe you'd like that DNA test.
You'd agree to that?
I think it might be for the best. Then we'd both know one way or the other if I've even got a son. If I have, then as hard as it may be to come to terms with after all these years, I would like to know. If I haven't, then...
Thank you. But I don't understand is, you and my father, why she wouldn't tell you. From all I've read and from what you've told me, you were good together. Why would she keep it a secret?
I think I know the answer, and it shows how selfless she was, and how she cared for me more than I knew. Something we often talked about, ripples.
Pardon?
Unintended consequences. Look, I picked up a stone from under the bench and walked onto the riverbank. I want to get rid of this stone. What happens if I drop it in the water?
You get wet from the splash.
What else? Watch. I lobbed the stone into the river and I didn't get wet. What do you see?
Ripples.
Exactly. The intention was to get rid of the stone. The unintended consequence was a series of ripples that grew in size, all from one little stone.
But what has that got to do with her not telling you that she was pregnant and that you were my father? Look, here in her diary, she's written, it wouldn't be right for either of us, and particularly not for him. I didn't understand it when I first read it, and I still don't.
It's very simple. Throw the stone in the water, splash. She tells me she's pregnant. First ripple. I do the honourable thing and marry her. In the mid-70s, it was still not the thing to be an unmarried mother. Next ripple. Baby arrives and we think life's good. Third ripple. What have our lives become? We were good friends, but not meant to be husband and wife.
Why not, if you got on so well together?
We did, but next ripple, we would not have been compatible as husband and wife. Oh, for God's sake, do I have to spell it out? How many ripples would then appear? You asked if I'm married. I would be, if the law allowed us to marry.
You're gay,
Finally.
but you were having sex with my mum.
You're quite naive, aren't you? Yes, I'm gay. And yes, I could be your father. It's not unknown. I was young and I suppose trying to come to terms with my sexuality. Sex was almost a comfort thing. Your mum knew where my preferences really lay. It was still difficult being gay in the 70s, especially if you were under 21. She guessed somehow, and one day we talked. She was so understanding, and that shared knowledge brought us even closer. She told me I should be true to myself. That last time after that party, and probably too much homemade beer, she told me about Susie, realizing that Susie was in love with her more than just as her oldest friend. She was almost doubting her own sexuality and needed reassurance. I told her she had nothing to worry about. She hugged me, and well, as I've already said, you know the rest. She must have really cared for me and my future not to tell me. I hope you believe that I did not abandon you. Now, what should we do about that DNA test? I threw the stone into the river and watched the ripples spread.